Welcome. My name is Shaida Bango, and this is another episode of This Is Her America. Today I'm going to be diving into something personal that happened to me, and that is my fostered life story. I've never really shared what happened to me. I've shared a little bit on social media, especially Instagram. By the way, if you're not following me on Instagram, you can follow me at Shaida Bango _. I've shared quite a few times about being raised in the foster care system, but I've never really shared my story. And this is the first time that I'm actually really diving into my life growing up in Gettr, Maryland, growing up with a single mother and how hard that was, and into my life going through foster care, going through kinship, and then eventually making my way out by aging outside of the system and trying to become the independent, responsible woman that you all know today. It's been quite the journey, and it's not have been an easy road to take. But I feel empowered by sharing my story, because I know that I am not alone in my experience. I know I have plenty of peers, plenty of friends who have walked a similar path that I have walked, and I want to take this time to just be open to shed some light on issues that go on in the foster care system. Because in this day and age, you see more and more situations of people coming out of broken homes. And as a conservative, as someone who's vocalized about being pro-family, about being pro the nuclear family, it is so important for children to grow up in a healthy and happy environment with adults, necessarily a mom and a dad, that form a very strong relationship and form a very strong foundation where they can grow well spiritually, emotionally, physically, developmentally, fundamentally. It's just so important. And today, as I share my story, it's just gonna enlighten what needs to be done more in this world, and what we could be doing more for children who are already vulnerable. This is my fostered life story. In this episode, as I dive into my story, I'm going to use fake names to cover up the identities of some of the adults that played a significant role in my life, especially during the foster care years, because I just want to protect everybody's privacy and not give clues to who they are or where they are. So let's get into it. In March of 2000, I was born to a single mother. My dad was pretty much an absentee father. He wasn't involved for most of my life. He may have been a little bit more involved in the first couple of months, maybe up to the first year of my life, but pretty much an absentee father. And there are moments where he does come in the picture periodically throughout my life. So let's just say that the relationship that I have with my dad is pretty scarce, especially today. When I was born, my mom and dad were not together. In fact, my dad was married to another woman who he had already had children with and continue to have kids with after I was born. So I have half siblings, all on my dad's side. Between him and my mom, it's just me. Growing up in Maryland with a single mother, I grew up pretty much isolated. My mother struggled to keep us afloat financially, and she also had emotionally and mentally emotional and mental problems. Growing up, I didn't know how to express, how to define it. But as I got older and reflect more, I understood some of the things that my mom was going through, and there were definitely issues happening inside her that she just wasn't working out for herself, and it really had a negative impact on me. I grew up very isolated. I didn't partake in any school clubs or peer related activities because my mom was certain that she always lived in this constant fear that something bad might happen to me. And so I never really got to socialize a lot with other peers as a kid. I never went out with friends out in the town, go to malls or go to the park and play after school. When I would go to school and hang out with my friends at school, they really just be my school friends. I never really hang out with people outside of school for most of my young childhood self, from pretty much ages pre-K years to maybe about 9 or 10. And that was rough because it really hurted my socialization skills. So where I went to elementary school, it was about a 5 to 10 minute walk from where I lived. So it was very easy for me to just commute there and back. And when I would leave school and come back home, my mom would work long hours as a nurse. She works as a CNA, and even now she still works and provide care for elderly people now. So I would come home and I was expected to unlock the door to the front door because I had the key. I was able to unlock the front door and lock it behind me, and she would take a tray of food that she would leave prepared for me as I would come back. And the tray of food would just consist of snacks, juice boxes, things to hold me over until she was able to come home a couple hours later. And so I would come home, I would take the plate of food that she would leave me, and I would take it into her bedroom because her bedroom had a double locked and mine didn't. And so I would go into her bedroom, locked the door, and I would basically just chill there. I would eat my snacks, do homework, watch PBS shows, and standard routine until she came home in the evening. So that that was when we would basically rejoin each other and be able to spend time together. My mother was physically and emotionally abusive towards me. And I think the reason why she was so abusive towards me was, again, the emotional and mental problems she endured within herself, that she didn't really learn how to channel it out in a healthy way that wouldn't endanger me. as a child, or even herself. And some of the ways that she was physically abusive towards me is how she would discipline me when I would misbehave or do something that was bad. She would beat me with flip-flops, spoons, even cords, even like electric cords that you use to plug in your electric devices. She would use to beat me, and she would leave bruises and things of and it was just awful. I just have very real and very traumatic memories of her just beating me as a child. I tried to get my school counselor involved and try to tell her about what the situation was. I thought, looking back, for the most part, that my school counselor was kind of dismissive of the issue. Maybe because she talked to my mom and my mom was able to explain it down, and it almost like she kind of took her side. And I just felt unheard. I just felt that nobody was taking my issues seriously. Because as a kid, I just felt unsure whether my mom really cared about me or loved me during that time. One day, my mom got a phone call, and it was from school, and she got really upset. She got so upset that when I came home from school that day, she got aggressive with me and decided to throw me out of the house. Just kicked her 9-year-old child outside the home. And I had nowhere to go. But this was how I remember it took place after school, because I came home. So I decided to walk back to school in hopes that I could probably figure out something there with a counselor or even somebody in the main office, hopefully. And I met up with a schoolmate of mine who I ended up explaining the situation to, and she was able to help get her parents involved, and my schoolmate and her family ended up taking me in for a couple of nights while my mom worked out this breakdown. And it was actually when the school got CPS, Child Protective Services, involved. And that's how I actually got introduced to my first social worker. During my entire time in the foster care system, I had 2 social workers, and my first social worker, who I will call Miss Val, will remain being my social worker or on my case, and from the time that I met her, which was 9/10 to 16 years old. So she was with me for majority of my time in the foster care system. My dad, this was also during the time when my dad briefly came into the picture, and he took me in for a while and was able to support me. However, his family didn't take a liking to me being there because they thought that meant trouble was coming from my mother. In fact, my stepmother, who was my dad's wife, and my older half-brother spoke to him about my presence may be causing a disturbance, because that might bring drama from my mother. My mother may have come and caused issues for them. And she did. And so what essentially happened is they gave him an ultimatum. Either he either had to move me out of the house, or they were going to handle things their way. And my father ended up placing me out of the home, and with my maternal aunt, who's my mother's sister, whom I should call her Aunt Elaine, and my uncle John. And together, my Aunt Elaine and Uncle John, they were a strong, faithful couple. They had a great church community. And in fact, years later, as I came back to them as a older teenager, as I continue to explain on the story, it will all make sense eventually. As I would come back to them as a teenager, there was a time where after foster care, I would come back to them as an older teenager. Yes. I ended up studying in the church studying the Bible in the church there, and become a disciple and a daughter of Christ. So I went from being with my dad at age 10. And at age 10, it was also when I was officially placed out of my mom's home. And it would be the last time I would ever be there. I would be placed out of my mom's home at age 10, and I would never return back there. So I was with my dad for a short amount of time, and now I was living with my aunt. I was going into I was finishing up 4th grade and going to 5th grade. And in fact, I had to change schools prior to going to 5th grade. So from age 10 to 11, I was living with my maternal aunt Elaine and Uncle John and my cousin, the daughter the only child that they ever had. And life was pretty much normal. I would go to school. My cousin, who was a few years older, would go to her school, which she already went to middle school at this time. We would go to church. We would partake in family activities, and we would go to summer camps, and things would be pretty normal. However, my mother didn't like that my maternal aunt Elaine had taken me under her wings and had me in her home and was practically raising me. And so there was friction between them. And so towards the end of my 5th grade year, my aunt told me that I was going to be placed out of the house, and I was practically going into the foster care system. Miss Val, my social worker, who I had issues with my social worker Val and how she chose to handle some of the issues that came up in my case throughout my time in the foster care system. There were times when she would have her moments and she would really step up as a social worker, but there were times where she gravely failed me. And to this day, I'm not really sure how it is possible that the Department of Social Services is able to overlook some of the things that she has done and has failed to do as a social worker, as someone whose job is literally to protect children from any sense of danger or unsafety. My Aunt Elaine told me that I was going to be moving out at the end of my 5th grade year, and that I was going to live in my first foster home. So Miss Val actually picked me up the day that I graduated from 5th grade and moved me into my first foster home. In my first foster home, my foster mother was a single grandmother. She had kids in the home. I'm going to call her Jewel. And Jewel had adult children who were already grown up and out of the house and married and had kids. And in the house where I was living in, she had 3 other girls. She had 2 teenage girls. One was about ready to leave for college and was going into her senior year. Both of the teenage girls she adopted at a young age. At young ages. And then she was fostering another girl besides me that was 5 to 6 years younger than me. There were things that happened to me in this house right from the get-go as I went into the house, between me and another child who was a biological member of the family. She wasn't living in the household with me, but she was related to Miss Jewel, my foster mom. And the situation was so it was so gruesome for me and so traumatic that even now when I think about it, when my social worker learned about it, she still had me remain in that household. And not only it happened right as I moved in, right as I was new and was getting to know everybody. It happened very quickly, and it's something that I'm not comfortable sharing just yet on this platform. So just please be easy on me when I share this. But even when I think about it now, it boggles my mind that she was even comfortable letting me remain in this household for the next 2 years that I was there. I was in this household from age 11 to 13. It was in this household I would constantly be fighting with other girls. One of the teenage daughters that she had would always pick fights with me, and she really didn't like me. I felt like I was alone and isolated from the other kids in the family. Jewel had grandchildren that would come visit her regularly, and there were definitely physical fights between me and them, and I definitely felt like I was on my own in that household a lot. And I started exhibiting symptoms of depression even as early as 11. And the reason why I know this is because I was seeing a psychologist at the time who explained to me that some of the things that we're feeling was kind of aligned with the diagnosis of a depressive disorder. However, I grew up in only Black foster homes, and in the Black community, at least in the community where I was in, mental health wasn't it was something frowned upon. Like when you talk about having mental health issues and going to counseling and things of that nature, it wasn't even, it was frowned upon. You didn't talk about mental health. You didn't share about emotional problems, mental health problems. Otherwise, you were deemed crazy or mentally ill. And that was definitely the energy I was getting from my foster mom, Jewel. And so she just wasn't somebody that could be there for me emotionally or mentally. It was also in this first foster home I was introduced to the CASA program. And in case you don't know what the CASA program is. It's a volunteer program where adults can, if you're thinking about getting involved in the foster care system, this might be a good way to go about it. You basically volunteer time to help mentor or guide a foster child. And you basically they will assign you to a case, and you'll be able to learn more about the foster child that you're being assigned to, and you're able to visit them and take them places and have fun, and basically like take the ache and the sting of being a foster kid for one moment. I had two casas. My first casa was an elderly woman who I really liked and really enjoyed spending time with. When she was my casa, she would pick me up regularly after school when I would come home, and take me to Burger King, and we would get smoothies, and she would bring snacks, and we would play board games and so on and so forth. But my first casa, she had issues going on in her personal life, and so she had to step down. And then that led to my second casa, who ended up staying with me not only throughout my whole time in the foster care system, but even afterwards, as I age out, even we still are connected even to this day. She has her whole own life. She lives outside the country now. She has a family. She has a kid, and I just feel like yesterday she was this PhD student that I was just had, that was my casa, and I had I had a wall. I built such a guard against her because I had such an issue with trust and trusting adults, because as an early age, I was already failed by so many adults at this point that it just became hopeless for me. But if you knew my casa and the effort and the energy and the time that she invested in me, and the belief that she had in me, that I could be more than just the label of a foster kid, that I could actually have an impact in the world around me. And she actually believed that I could do great things, and she would actually encourage me to do well in school, which in fact I did. Despite having a troubling home environment, one of the things that I was able to do mostly throughout most of my time in the foster care system was excel well in school. I was an honor roll student almost throughout middle school and some of high school. And when it came time to think about college, I was actually accepted to most of the colleges I applied to. And so my casa, who I will name her Hannah, because I'm not sure if she's comfortable with me sharing her identity. I just think Hannah, the gratitude I have for her and the impact she has had in my life is just unmatched. It truly is unmatched, and I will always be grateful for what she has done for me. So, moving on next, I'm in my first foster home. Things are happening in that home that's traumatic for me. I'm having periods of depression in the household, and so my social worker, Miss Val, came to the house one day and suggested if I would go visit another family, a foster family, who would end up being my next foster parents, and it will become my next foster home. So I'm in my so the summer after my 7th grade year, I moved out of my first foster home and moved into the second foster home. And with that foster family, I would think that this would be my forever home for various of reasons. My foster parents, whom I should name Debbie and Jake, were a married couple who had 2 adult sons, both out of the house. Actually, one was getting ready to go to college upstate, like up in Western Maryland. So when I came in, it was practically going to just be me in the household as the only kid that they would have to attend to. Jake, who was my foster dad, was a retired veteran who was on disability because he had an injury that he sustained from a really bad car accident. And then there was Debbie, who was a government employee working in DC. I think at the time she was working in the Department of Health and Human Services. She had some important government job. I'm not really sure. And she also had a PhD. So she was also known as a doctor. And I really had so much like I admire her like so much. Like I thought that she was who I wanted to be when I grow up. So going into this home, I thought they knew from the get-go that I was a really good student. So they challenged me to keep up with my good grades as I finish up middle school. And so I did that. I kept up with honor rolls and I was partaking in school activities. This was the time where I actually did step, and I really enjoyed doing step. I was also doing soccer, and I was becoming more and more of a teenager. I was able to hang out with friends outside of school and feel like a teenager for the first time in my life. I feel like a teenager. I feel like a kid. I feel like a kid doing kid things. And I was in an environment where I was allowed to do that. So it really broke me when things didn't work out the way that I thought it would be. I thought Debbie and Jake were really the ones that were going to keep me, and it just never really worked out that way. And the way that it didn't work out was it was quite abrupt. So practically one day during the summertime, I did something out of irrational fear that it set my foster dad, Jake, off so badly that he asked the social worker, Miss Val, if I could be removed from the home. It was an awful day for me because that morning when I woke up, we were just bickering back and forth. I don't know what we were bickering about, but it just wasn't a good situation. And I'm not sure what I did to upset him, but he already just didn't. He just was not having any, he just wasn't putting up with me today. And so I did something quite irrational. I escaped. I I escaped out of my bedroom window, which I climbed out of, and walked almost 2 miles down to a nearby food market, where I would then get a hold of a phone and call my social worker. And that day, my social worker came to pick me up and told me that I was being asked to leave. And from there, I would go into recip care. And for those of you guys who don't know what recip care is, in the foster care system, when children need to be who need to be placed in emergency, there are foster parents who are willing to provide short-term care, which means that instead of being there long-term, you will only be there for a few weeks, a couple of days, or even a few months. The whole point of recip care it is very short-term. It is not something that necessarily needs to be prolonged. So there are foster parents out there who just provide recip care, which means they only to provide care for children and only in emergent situations. And so I was staying in a recip care environment for a couple of days with an elderly woman and her daughter. And this takes me to my next foster home. My second foster home, I was only there from ages 13 to 14 because I was finishing up I was there for only my 8th grade year. And my next foster home, I was only there for 14 through 16. And I feel like this is probably one of the most troubling situations that I ever encountered in my entire foster care life up to this point. And so I'm going to be right back. I'm going to take a little pause right here and just gather my thoughts real quick before I share more. Because what I'm about to share with you may or may not make sense or may be troubling for you to even understand as a listener. So I'll be right back with my foster life story. Okay, so we're at my third foster home. My foster parent is a single mother. Her name is, I'm going to call her Mary Ann. Mary Ann had by the time I was coming into her home, she has 2 adult sons. One was out of the house. The other was living at home, but he was mainly independent and had his own space and even paid rent, from what I understood. She also had 2 teenage daughters. The oldest one was getting ready to leave for college in Upper West Maryland, and her oldest daughter, who she adopted when she was a young age, a very young girl. Not Marianne, the foster daughter. When her adopted daughter was a very young girl, they were very close and they had a very close relationship. When I was in the home, their relationship grew apart, and it was probably very heartbreaking. I didn't really understand much. But there was this idea that was at the time when when I was in the home, their relationship fell apart. There was this idea that I had something to do with it, that I had something to do with worsening of their relationship. And then she had her other daughter, who was about my age. And so there's that. It was me, my foster parent, Mary Ann, and her teenage daughter, who was my age, and then her oldest daughter was leaving to go to college, and her adult son is still at home. There, that's the picture. In the beginning, we got along pretty great. It was fine. She saw that I was a really good student and really encouraged me to keep up with my grades. And I just joined sports. I tried to join sports. I did extracurricular activities. I really dived into forensics. If you guys don't know what the forensics club is, it's basically a speech club where you take different experts from books, plays, movies, songs, poems, whatever, and you basically reenact them as like a speaker and try to use different tones and really like just try to like use different tones and emotions to really move your audience. It was really good. It's really impactful. I really encourage everybody, if you can, to do forensics or do speech club, a certain speech club at your school if you offer it. Anyways, I was doing that. I was doing schoolwork, and there's that. At this time, I was severely struggling in my mental health. I had suicidal ideation. I was going to counseling. I was also undergoing psych evals where I would express to the person who was administrating my psych evals. I'm not sure, looking back, if it was a counselor, like such as somebody with a psychology background, or if it was a social worker. Like that was never established to me. Anyways, when you're a foster kid, it's very common, actually very, very common, that you would be going to counseling because for most cases, they actually encourage you or require it by the court. My foster parent, Mary Ann, was very much on the anti-mental health train, especially since she practically was probably influenced by community, especially in the Black community, where conversations surrounding mental health, mental illness, medication, counseling, it's all connected to the idea that you must be somewhat crazy. And as a teenage girl going through the system, she would put this idea on me that if I didn't act straight or act proper, especially in front of the white, quote unquote, white social workers, that they will just deem me crazy or put me in a mental health hospital, lock me away or whatever. And that's just something that no 14, 15-year-old girl needs to hear. Yes, in this home, I was definitely age 14 to 16. Looking back, I'm not sure how I made it in this, how I survived 2 years in this home, because my foster mom was brutally and even emotionally abusive. I mean, she would definitely say things to me to definitely get under my skin. But not only that, she would definitely talk down to me, ridicule me in front of other people, humiliate me, because she felt like she had that power. In the local foster care community that in the local foster care community where I grew up in the foster care system, she had the reputation of being one of the better foster parents, or like one of the best foster parents in the area, because of how many kids she would foster throughout her home. She would always tell me that I was one of the worst kids out of 50 or so that she has had fostered. Like one of the worst difficult kids that she's ever had because of the mental health issues and even all the issues that I probably gave her while I was in her home. And not only that, she was also at a later point while I was in a home, she would take in a foster baby, and she would also get married during this time when I was in our home. She met a guy and got married to a couple months later, but that's not significant to the story. So she's juggling a lot of things. She's juggling motherhood and foster parenting, being a mother to her teenage daughter who was still living at home while the oldest one was away. The oldest daughter, who she adopted, was away at college. And then she's a full-time employee at a school. She worked at a local school as a school nurse. And then she was going to school herself, part-time, night school, actually, to work on her degree so she could work in psychology in the near future. So she's doing all of this, and she's fostering me, and she's not even trying to be attentive to my problems. She just does not want to deal with it, especially times where social services had to call her because they needed to notify her that I had expressed to the person who was administrating my psyche evals that I was feeling suicidal and that she needed to take me to the crisis center. And when you, as a foster parent, when you hear that, you would think that it would create some kind of like emotion in you to be alert and be attentive and care for the foster kid that is under your supervision, that you might need to it creates a sense that you need to be maternal. You need to actually care about the kid that's actually in your care. And when you hear something like that, it should alarm you. It should alert you to know that there's a problem in your house and you need to attend to it. Nope. Just, that wasn't her. And matter of fact, she told me to my face, especially when I was going through really hard times, that, she would ridicule me. She would tell me that you need to get your act straight. You can't afford to look crazy as a black girl in front of these quote unquote white social workers. They're going to lock you away in some psych hospital and you're just never getting out. Just unbelievable things that you really shouldn't say to a teenage girl, and just really inappropriate. And now that I look back, I just realized that I don't know how I made it 2 years in that house. I've eventually ended up leaving because my maternal aunt came back in the picture, and this is the same aunt that I talked about in the earlier side of this episode. My aunt Elaine and Uncle John, they came into the picture, and they decided to bring me back into the house after years of going through the foster care system because nothing was really working out for me, these foster homes. And it's almost a it's almost like I'm making a circle, going back to the first people that I thought I was safe with, that I thought would never give up with me, and now I'm just expected to just be here and stay with them. And at this point, my struggles still persist. I still struggle with depression. I'm still going to counseling for it, and I'm at a new school and I had to switch schools at a time where roughly at the beginning of 11th grade, because where I was going to school and from my aunt's place, like the bus route was basically non-existent, and my aunt wasn't willing to drive me back and forth to school every day for the next, 2 years, I guess. So there was no other choice but to switch schools. And the school that the high school that I ended up going to was the one I ended up graduating from, which was John F. Kennedy. And I just feel so beaten down. I felt so beaten down by the foster care system. I felt so beaten down by my foster parent, Mary Ann, who treated me horribly, emotionally, fundamentally, spiritually. The immense abuse that this woman put me through, she was just probably better off just hitting me, right? Like physical abuse, it taught me that physical and emotional abuse, they could sometimes be so intertwined that sometimes it doesn't feel like one could be worse than the other. And so, sharing a little bit about my Auntie Lane and Uncle John, one thing that I will thank them for is they introduced me to the church. They got me involved in the teen ministry, where I first learned how to study the Bible. And here's the thing about God and me. Throughout my times in foster care, each home that I went to, there was some religious foundation in each foster home. All of my foster parents, Jewel, the single grandmother in my first foster home, Debbie and Jake, the couple in my second foster home, and then Mary Ann, they all believed in God. They all believed in the power of the church, and knowing that there is a God, that there is somebody that you're going to need to answer to when you do leave this world. And yes, that was one of the things that still persists, is that this idea of God, and that He is prevalent in your life. And so I was with my aunt from 16 to 18. I ended up graduating high school while in her care. And I ended up going to church. I ended up studying the Bible. I ended up making God my Lord and Savior of my life, and decided to get baptized a few weeks before graduation. And it really showed me that that despite all of my struggles in the foster care system, that there is a Father in heaven that has looked over me and has graciously has placed His hand on me and has protected me from very grueling situations, and has loved me despite all of my mistakes and flaws and all of the bad things I've done. That He looks at me and He thinks, and He sees that I'm His daughter, and there's nothing that could really change that. And so from 18 to 21, I get ready to leave for college. I went to college for a short time, before taking a break. And I ended up aging out of the foster care system at 21 because in the state of Maryland, there's this thing, there is the extension of foster care. In some states, you age out of foster care right at 18 because that's when you become a legal adult. In other states, Maryland is one of them. You can age out at 21 because they have programs and they call it the extension of foster care. I forgot what they call it. It's something about independent living. You're an adult, but you're not ready to age out. And there is some debates about whether or not if foster children what is a good age to be aged out of the foster care system. And in my opinion, it's all really difficult. It's all really muddy, and there can't be some governmental some governmental ban on it that says, okay, this is the exact age that that foster children need to be leaving the system. Like, this is when they officially should age out. I think it's too murky, it's too complicated, and you can't really put a time limit or even an age limit on it. But I think that's going to be all say for another episode. So what has the foster care being growing? Let me start this over again. What has being in foster care has taught me? Well, it has taught me, it has revealed in me that I have an inner armor that I never knew that I had in me all these times where I've gone through really hurtful, traumatic situations, and I needed to be protected, and I needed to be able to move forward and know that it's not a reflection on me or who I am as an individual. And it also says here in Psalms 139:14, it says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. And I look at that scripture and I think, yes, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. God made me, God empowered me to be able to stand up for myself in grueling situations and never let anybody or anything kick me down because they think that they can. This world could be such a harsh place, and people are going to try to stampede you, but you always have to hold your own, because not everybody that claims to support you is going to do what's best for you. Another thing that being in the foster care system has taught me is that you should never be so short-sighted, and that you should always be looking forward and be persistent and be proactive about your future, about your plans, and don't give into the stereotypes or believe that you're going to be statistic, that you're going to grow out of the foster care system and go into the welfare state and just rely on the government and be jobless and maybe a drug addict, which is overwhelmingly the statistics, that you can actually make a place for yourself in this world, that you can actually be a success story, that you can find your own and do something that makes you happy and work towards something that will not only sustain you, but even uplift you out of your circumstances. Just how it says in Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you, and you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. And sometimes I look back and think about the times where I struggled with suicide ideation. Those were times where I think about giving up the most and think about not wanting to do with anything or anybody in this world. And that was really hard for me. It was really hard because I felt that God kind of casted me out a little bit, and that I was just not good for anything, when all of that is just such an extreme lie. And it's a lie that the world feeds us, that we are nothing, that we that even when you come from a system that disenfranchise you so much, like the foster care system, you are made to feel that you are nothing and that you have nothing, when in fact you have everything. You can have just about everything and anything that you want, and that you have a place in the kingdom, that you have a place with God. Like, God mapped out your life for you. He wrote down everything that happened to you. He's already has had your story written down before you even go to the next chapter. And he knows what your future has in store for you. And it's a beautiful one. And I believe that regardless of the challenges and struggles, God has something better planned for you. That it's just all for nothing. That it's all not just helpless. And I think in the foster care system, it's really, especially when you read stories of kids going through foster home after foster home, aging out with nothing, and then something happens and they're able to buy their first home, and they're able to find love and have a job and go into a career that they long dreamed of, and even go to college. And I think that's a really, really beautiful thing. And I think we need to hear more stories of that, more stories of people growing out of the foster care system and actually doing something. We need to hear. We need to be powering foster children and making them believe that they can be something, that they are to be something, because God made them special. He has plans for them, plans to prosper them, plans to not hurt them. And in this system where it is very well that people are not looking out for your best interests, know that there is someone out there looking for your best interests in every circumstances. So I hope that listening to my story, that it gives you some glimpse. I encourage you to do more research about the foster care system. My story is only just a glimpse of what goes on in the foster care system. And as I progress through these episodes, I hope to share more stories surrounding the foster care system and why it needs more and more attention today. Until next time, this has been Her America.